Alright, section 11, your fuel system. Fuel system. Section 11, fuel system. EMD 645. Description. Fuel injector description. Installation, timing injector, staking injector, servicing injector, test stand, setting up test stand, checking operation test stand, test preparation, holding pressure to leak test, rack freeness test, binding plunger test, plate replacing filter, storage, injector linkage, description, checking, setting racks, fuel filter, description, maintenance, service and data, equipment list. Alright, your fuel system. Description. Engine fuel system figure 111.1 consists of the fuel injector with the engine mounted fuel filter, fuel supply return manifold. The components external to the engine, such as the motor-driven fuel pump, the fuel tank, fuel junction strand, the connection with the inlines, complete with the fuel system in operation. Fuel from the fuel tank is drawn from the fuel pump through the suction strand and delivered to the engine-mounted filter, then passes through the filter elements, fuel manifold, supply line, injector inlet filter with each of the cylinder into the injector with a small portion of fuel supply with each of the injector pumped into the cylinder very high pressure through the needle valve sprays tip of the injector. The quantity of the fuel injected depends on the rotative position of the plunger and the injector rack with the governor. If the excessive fuel will not use the injector flow of the injector, surface the lubricating and the cooling working parts of fuel leave the injector through the return fuel filter with the filter protect for the injector for the event of the backward flow of fuel from the injector from the return of the fuel line with the return fuel filter for the injector. Excessive fuel passes through the fuel return line manifold with the relief valve inlet with the return fuel sight glass engine mounted fuel filter. The valve restricts the return fuel, maintaining back pressure on the injector. Fuel continues into the return fuel sight glass and filling the glass downward with the sand pipe into the glass through the return line of the fuel supply tank. So 11 shows your typical fuel system, shows the injectors and the fuel supply line, fuel return line, injection filters, return fuel sight glass, bypass sight glass. Fuel injectors. The description: injector figure 11 the tube located with the sheave of the tapers with a hole for the center each for the cylinder of the spray, tipping protruding slightly below the bottom of the head. The position of the head by the dial with the held in place by the injector crab and nut. The external working parts of the injector lubricated with the oil with the end of the end of the injector rocker arm, adjusting the screw of the internal working parts of the lubricated with the cooled and flow of the fuel oil through the injector. The cross-section unit injector names the various parts shown figure 11 3. 13. 11.2 shows your fuel injector. Alright, the plunger is given with the constant stroke reciprocating motion injector coming at the action, acting with the rocker and plunger follow with the timing of the injection during the plunger stroke with adjusting the screw end of the rocker arm shown with the flow of the fuel with the injector during a downward stroke rotating the plunger means of the rack with the gear with the control of the quantity of the fuel injected cylinder during each stroke. Rack position is controlled with the governor through the injector cover, control lever with the gears key and to the sliding fit with the plunger with allow with the plunger vertical movement. Jose, so it shows your flower, fuel line, follower, stop, pin, filter cap, retainer, filter spring, stop, spin, spring, gasket, body, gear, a gear, a seal, rack plug, locating dial, identification grooves, gear, retaining plunger, bushing, nut, spring, spill, deflector, spacer, valve, spring, check valve, cage, valve, spring, cage, needle valve, spring, seal, spray or seat, spray tip orifice. Alright, 11.4 shows the injector fuel flow, shows the top stroke bypass point, injector starts, injector ends, bottom stroke. The alcohols near the bottom of the plunger control the opening and closing of both fuel ports of the plunger, bushing rotation of the plunger, regulate for the time of the pull parts with close during the downward stroke, controlling the quantity of the fuel injected into the cylinder shown in figure 11.5. As the plunger is rotated with the ideal position with the fuel load position, pump parting of the stroke is length of the injection started earlier, but the more fuel is injected, the proper atomization of fuel is accomplished by high pressure created with the downward stroke of the plunger, which forces the fuel parts past the needle valve out of the spray hole tip of the injector. Injector have the adjustable calibrating slide mounted with the side of the injector body with adjacent with the rack. The slide is incorporated solely as a means of adjusting injector output with the controls by stand. Filters or fuel inlet outlet connection protect the working parts on the injector. 11.5 shows your quantity of fuel injected controlled by a rotating plunger with a rack. This one shows your half load position. All right, maintenance. When installation injector engine, make sure the correct injector for the engine is applied. Since the injector body, tapered hole with the cylinder head are clean. Um, Tapered hole with the cylinder head are clean. Shows the install the injector crab cylindrical wash nut and torque number nut to 50 pounds of torque. Correct injector rack to the level of assembly. Install the tightening of the fuel supply with the turn line of the injector with the engine fuel manifold. The install of the rocker arm shaft of the rocker arm, loosening the injector rocker arm, locking it back off the adjusting screw before tightening the rocker arm shaft nuts. Injector is now ready for timing. The timing of the injector with the injector installed with the making timing adjustment is solved with the injector. Note, the injector cannot be timed if the overspeed has been tripped. It must have first be reset with the engine crankshaft barred over to at least 1 revolution. Set the flywheel at 0 degrees top dead center of the cylinder being timed. Inspect the injector timing gauge and then the hole with the provided with the injector body. Figure 11.6. Loosen the lock nut, turn the rocker arm, adjusting screw until the shoulder of the gauge just past the overflow over the injector follower guide. Tighten adjusting screw and lock nut while holding the adjusting screw in position. Screwdriver rechecking setting. 11.6 shows your timing injector. Shows the injector timing gauge and your rocker adjuster arm screw. Sticking injectors. Engines and main cars sticking injectors due to fuel, lube, oil, filter, maintenance conditions. Since these conditions very often are monetary, injector removal may be minimized by using alcohol to free injectors while installed. This is done by applying ordinary commercial methanol to the injectors through a hole opposite with the timing tool hole, popping with the injector motor over the engine. Stick condition usually occur with the injectors, which are held with the plungers down with the engine stopped. They show the injector rack show the sign of the sticking. They should be checked for the gum and the varnish deposits. If the present with the rack should be cleaned with the alcohol and rechecked if the sticking permits. Persists, the injector should be removed and replaced with the operational injectors. Injectors should be crushed out with a cut out the engine operated. If the injector is open and operating unsatisfactory, cannot be remedied or replaced. The engine should be shut down until corrective action has been taken. Alright, servicing injectors. Servicing injectors, clean working conditions must be maintained. Dust and dirt, any of the form of the frequent cause of the injector failure with the injector at the engine with the protective against the dirt and dust, other foreign material, the various filters employed with the injector is in storage. It is protected against harmful material, the filter sealing of the body, opening for the turning of product protected shipping blocks. However, the entire different set of the conditions encountered with the becomes necessary to disassemble the injector with the repair, overhaul. These conditions necessitate special shop equipment. The trained personnel recommended with the non-operational injectors to return electric motive to rebuild the unit in exchange. Alright, injector test stand. In order to ensure the efficient engine's performance, injector should be tested whenever the removal of the engine, regardless of the region. With the removal of the advisable test complete with the engine insert during each of the annual inspection. Recommended with the injectors should be tested with the same oil used for the protection against the rust of the given and storing injectors. It is important an individual doing testing to understand the principal injector operation testing procedure in order to prevent acceptance for the defective injector's rejection of the good ones. Instructors using the injector test stand and an outline of each of the separate test procedures along with a basic explanation over operation files. These instructions cover the testing with all the needle valve and injector of the test stand should show. On 11.7 of the procedures are not applicable to other testing. Equipment since the injector leak off rates vary greatly in portion of the valve fuel contained in the high pressure portion of the test stand. Figure 11.7 shows the injector test stand pump lever, clamping wrench, injector popping lever, pressure shutoff valve. Alright, setting up the test stand. Basically, the stand consists of the fuel reservoir filled with a high-pressure pump with the pressure gauge, the necessary connecting line, fitting to the supply fuel for the injector. Understand where the test should be set up, instructed by manufacturer inspection. Carefully, dirt and foreign material with the tank line with the fill of the tank with clean fuel. Operating pump to purge all free air from the system. In an investigation shown the viscosity of the fuel oil used in the test stand has been marked effective with the test result, regardless of the oil. Fuel oil may be used provided with the viscosity not less than 100 degrees Fahrenheit at 30 to 32 SSUs. Do not reuse fuel oil that have been pumped through the injectors of a plastic bowl. Check the test stand. Install the test block with the plate for the injector and the stand pump with the pressure of 2,000 psi. As indicated with the gauge of 5 minutes pressure, should not have to drop below 1,975 psi. Release the block, recheck it at 500 psi and 1,000 psi. Pressure should hold 1 minute with no apparent gauge drop. Make Make the test with a pressure shutoff valve with a figure 11.7 that open all the way. The test satisfactory injector test may be made with the shutoff valve. Proceeding with the test indicating line leakage in the sand. Repeat the test of closing off the shutoff valve before timing the leak off rates. If the tests are satisfactory with the shutoff valve closed, it's necessary to use the shutoff valve while making the injector holding pressure test. Placing a new stand in the operation after removing the replacing the gauge, fuel tank, and the filter pump with any reasonable test block should be installed with a pressure at 2,500 psi, vented with at least 6 times before making operational check. Test stand operation must conserve the test stand instrument rather than the tool. Every effort of the made to make the manual operation repeated tests the same. The following general information provide help in attaining uniform operation. All right, general information when operating pump, use of the 40 strokes per minute to provide the fuel rate, operate with the check valve smoothly, circulate the fuel with the injector. When using proper lever, they do not use such force to damage either the injector or the lever. Do not permit the lever to fly up freely. And when making holding tests, do not pump the stand above 2,500 psi. The test stand regularly should be rechecked daily of the leaks of the using test block. Fuel and oil testing should not be reused. Your injector test. Preparation. Install the injector in the test stand. Fill the injector with the fuel oil, but do not connect the fuel line from the pump to the injector at this time. Set up the injector rack at a maximum fuel output position, minimum rack length. Pop the injector with the popping lever, the figure 11.7, approximately 40 smooth, even with the strokes per minute. Finally, atomized spray with which should be each of the hole for the tip of the rapid closing of the needle valve should be produced with a sharper chatter. And then the valve opens with the preceding finally atomized spray with the valve seized with the producing sharp of the chatter with the maybe severe several rapid strokes of the lever dislodge any of the foreign material of the valve seat with the now valve with the still fits the function properly. A stuck needle dirt valve seat with a defective valve seat with maybe the cause. Alright, holding pressure in a leak test. All injectors loss of pressure due to the leakage. Any of the several points of the leakage must be controlled during the injector manufacture to prevent engine lube oil dilution. And the holding pressure will qualify the injectors having the specified leak off rates provide with the leakage of the proper point and the satisfactory control. To manually hold the test and fuel line block of the injector fuel and pump oil and pump until the fuel is discharged with the filler cap of the opposite side to remove air. Apply 1,800 psi to 2,000 psi pressure through the injector. No leakage is permitted to the body seal, filter, gap, gasket, or body plugs, or between the spray tip of the injector nut. The injector should be qualified with a pressure holding test with the timing the interval with the drop of the pressure with the 2,000 psi to 1,500 psi. Interval less than 20 seconds or 30 seconds. New or recondition. Repeat the test with the close of the pressure shutoff valve of the test immediately after establishing 2,000 psi. This ensures the leak down time is not to be affected with the proper leak of the test stand itself with the time interval of the pressure drop down of 2,000 to 1,500 psi is still less than 20 seconds and 30 seconds or 20 seconds use 30 or new recondition. Injector should be rejected to relieve the pressure before removing the injector of the test stand. Wrap a cloth around the injector fuel line connections. Back off the clamping wrench figure 11.7. Alright, your rack freeness test. The rack engages a small pinion with the injector plug with a strip of the rotate with the plunger. Respect with the two ports of the injector plug bushing and regulate the amount of fuel injected within each stroke of the plunger. Binding the wrap generally causes the damaged gear teeth. The screw of the plunger pushing over the gouging of the rack itself. The binding of the rack may cause the sluggish erratic speed. Changes overall overspeed trip action. The consider the satisfactory of the rack must fall in and out of through full travel by its own weight. The injector is held horizontally rotated by its axis. Your binding and plunger test. The failure of the injector plunger of the moving up and down freely indicates scoring with the plunger and bushing of the weak and broken spring. A binding plunger will cause erratic cylinder firing and extreme causes of overspeed trip action. Place the injector testing, but do not attach the fuel line. Place the rack in the full fuel position. Pump all the fuel out of the injector popping lever. Figure 11.7, and with all the fuel has been removed, depress the injector plunger fully, extend the travel slowly, release the popping lever, simultaneously move the injector repeatedly in and out through the fuel travel. Replacing injector filters. Injector filters should not be disturbed or removed except during injector reconditioning when all parts are completely washed or in vent of the fuel with a stoppage of the injector. Stowing the injectors. When the injectors are not used with a considerable length of the time, they are protected again for the rust. Using stable non-corrosive straight-run petroleum distillated within kerosene vial of range is also recommended, but the injectors should be tested with using oil. If this is done, treatment will be taken care of at the time of the injector testing. After treatment, the injector should be stored in a protective container until needed, but the container should be accommodated with the injector during holding during the rack, similar to test shown in 11.8. 11.8 shows your injector holding rack. Injector linkage. Description. Injector linkage consists of the mechanical arrangements between the governor of the injector, permitting all injector rack positions to be changed simultaneously when the governor terminal shaft is rotated. Two injector control rods connecting the lever of the governor terminal shaft with the injector control shaft. The injector control shaft, one each of the bank, extend the length of the cylinder bank under the cylinder head over the head covers of its frames. Each cylinder location of the lever is pinned with the control shaft, adjusting link with the connects with the control shaft lever. The injector control lever mounted on the cylinder head, one end of which straddles the ball at the end of the injector rack. Shows the adjusting linkage nut, locking nut, injector control shaft, and then your injector rack. Alright, this shows your injector control rod, the injector control shaft, the injector control lever. Maintenance. Before attempting to set the injector racks, all racks linkage should be checked with the binding and sticking anywhere but would affect the operation. Setting injector racks. Injector rack should be used set in the engine operation temperature. Rack is set within the engine is not operating. The setting should be rechecked with the operating temperature is reached. Add the engine temperature increase with the right bank rack with the length of the shortens the left bank length increases. The change of the left bank is insignificant, but the change of the right bank may be shortened in the racks beyond with a minimum of 1/164th of an inch tolerance. Note, every time the governor is installed with the engine, injector rack settings should be checked. Due to the manufacturing tolerance of the governing mounting bolts of the position of the governor in relation to the injector linkage can be changed with the rack section. Set the injector rack of the engine valves. Install the injector linkage. Figure 1110 and figure of 1110 show the injector rack positioning, injector linkage, and the setting jack. The adjusting setting jack until the pointer of the governor aligned with the governor terminal shaft with a scale of 1 inch mark. Using the injector gauge with the 1 and 11 to set the rack of the same range markings on the gauge. Rack setting gauge is an 8-to-1 multiplying gauge indicating a 1/64th of an inch tolerance of the 1 by 1/8 of an inch each side of the center marking of the gauge scale. It is important a proper rack gauge that you use them provide previous model rack gauge is the measurement of the rack length of the body of the injector instead of the face of the calibration side. The correct gauge of the setting and injector for the calibration side can be readily identified by a single location button on the front face of the gauge. The gauge can be used for all injectors. Figure 1111 shows the injector rack gauge center mark setting range SN LN gauge scale. The place for the gauge over the injector rack, holding the gauge firmly against the face of the calibrating slide of the injector. Figure 1112 check with the gauge pointer with the pointer of the short S for the end of the gauge scale. Outside of the setting range, the rack is not extended out far from the injector, loosening the lock nut, adjusting the link with the figure 11.9, turning adjusting nut. On the link until pointer of the as long as on the longer L end of the scale, the reverse portion of the travel used when it the scale setting range, holding and adjusting nut with a tightening torque. The reason exceeding with the setting range with a making adjustment is so that the setting of all the racks of the backlash will be taken up in the same direction. Figure 1112 shows the injector rack gauge application, pointer, injector gauge, rack, and calibration side. Alright, when pointer is along with the L end of the scale with the point with the setting range with accuracy, injector rocker gauge can be checked with the insert of the master block with the gauge body powder. Pointer should be aligned with the center of the marker on the scale. Alright, your fuel filter describes the engine mount fuel filter, figure 1113, located with the right top and the right front of the engine. Two sides of the glasses provide with the top of the filter hosing that provide with a visual indication with the condition of the fuel system flow diagram. Figure 1114 indicates fuel flow for the filter. Figure 1114 fuel flow through the filter shows the filter assemblage filter elements, the two engine manifold, then the section drain fuel tank, the relief valve at 60 psi, bypass set fuel in, drain the fuel tank for relief valve, 10 psi, return to manifold. Fuel returning from the injector passes for the return fuel glass near the engine, return to the fuel tank with a normal operation of the glass of fuel flow. The 10 psi relief valve of the inlet of the return fuel light sight glass established fuel back of the injectors improved operation. Figure 1113 shows your fuel filter, your fuel fill sight glass, normal fuel by sight your glass filler elements. Alright, your air gas fuel system will appear with the return sight fuel sight glass on the bubbles entering the fuel entering the place suction line may cover the entire engine to misfire stop. The bubbles in the return fuel sight glasses with the fuel pump running and the engine stop indicate air entering the suction side of the fuel pump. The bubbles appearing only when the engine is running indicate the leaking valves of the filter injectors allowing combustion gases to fuel, getting fuel, little or no fuel with the return fuel, slight gases with the bypass site with the glass empty with the indicator of the insufficient fuel supply of the engine. Under normal operation and bypass site, glass farther but the engine should be empty of fuel. As the elements become dirty and fuel pressure is filtered will increase. The fuel pressure of the element housing approximately 6 psi. The release valve under the glass will open. Fuel will enter the fill bypass site glass and then return to the fuel tank, starving the engine. The disposable filter elements mounted directly with the filter body with the element consists of a pleated paper with the round with the perforated metal tube. The case of the enamel steel shell capable of withstanding internal pressure at 150 psi. Narrow prime gasket attached to the top each from the element ensures sealing. Maintenance filler elements should be removed. The new ones installed with the internal intervals specified in the scheduled maintenance program. At the time of the element replacement of filter body, sight glass should be cleaned. Shut down the engine and the engine fuel supply. Unscrew the elements using a strap wrench if necessary, and discard them. Apply firm oil with the gasket of the new element and apply element to the filter body. Hide and tighten the gasket contains contacts of the filter body, and then tighten 1/2 turn. Check the condition of sight glass and clean. Check the leakage for the engine and started. It shows the service data, equipment, fuel system, part numbers, and that is the section 11, the fuel system of the electromotive electric maintenance manual, electric motive fuel system, section 11, 645, engine testing.